camera cannibalism. What do I mean by that? As a lot of you know, I'm a big fan of folding cameras from the early 1920s really through the late 30s. But the reality is these cameras are getting old, and it's hard to get really good examples of a lot of these cameras. In a lot of cases, the bellows may have holes in it. In some cases, the shutters are damaged. It might have a lot of rust. It might just be out of alignment because the camera was used a whole bunch. So camera cannibalism is a technique that I use a lot, where I'll buy 2, 3, 4 examples of the same camera for a very small sum of money, and then I'll put it together and to create one perfect camera. The nice part about this is that a lot of times I'm able to mix and match different improvements from different cameras to create sort of one super camera. And I'm also a lot of times able to then have more spare parts and build a second or third camera as well. A camera that I really love is the Kodak folding Hawkeye number 2, which is this particular camera here. My particular model is from 1926, and it's an absolutely beautiful folding camera. This camera shoots 116 film, and I'll show you my solution to be able to shoot 120 film on this camera. But what I like about this camera, great bellows, it's got a beautiful lantern viewfinder right here on the top for framing your image. And it has a really interesting meniscus lens. I love the rendering quality, and I love the fact that I can flip that lens and get a beautiful out of focus image around the edges of the frame and have a really decently sharp image in the middle. Kodak made millions of these different cameras, and that's the great part for you and I, because it's easy to find lots of examples and once again cannibalize cameras to make a perfect camera. My first camera in this series that I purchased was this camera here. It came with an instruction manual in a box. This is a Hawkeye number 2, and this particular model, this is C, shoots 120 film. The camera body itself is in exceptionally good shape. The shutter, the lens, everything was great. But the one problem with this camera, and I did my best to fix it, but I couldn't, is that the bellows had so many holes in it that I wasn't able to patch it. So what I've done is I've taken the bellows out of this camera, and I've now ordered replacement bellows. So once again, I'll be able to make this camera usable here within the next couple of weeks. Regarding patching bellows, I use 2 different materials. I either use Liquitex, which is this material here. It's really good. I prefer, though, Bostic & Sullivan makes a bellows patch sealer material. It comes as a kit with some fabric that you can use for big tears. This stuff works really, really, really well. But here's my take on bellow patching. If you open up a camera and there's just 1 or 2 little pinholes, yeah, go ahead and patch it. But if you open up a camera and there's like 100 pinholes, those bellows, in my opinion, are pretty much dead. Because if it's 100 pinholes now, even if you patch it, more pinholes are going to form later. So that was the case with this particular camera. I opened it up, I looked at patching it, and I just went, that's crazy. So I was able to get a set of replacement bellows for this camera for literally $12. It's a little hard to install. I'll do a video on how that happens when the bellows arrive. Then what happened was I decided to buy a larger version, a 116 camera. I'm a real sucker for 116 cameras, and what I like about them so much is the fact that once I've modified the camera from 116 to 120, I get this beautiful panoramic negative that's basically almost a 6x12. It's 11 centimeters wide in a camera that folds up so small. Isn't it amazing that that's going to be basically a 6x12 panoramic camera? I first bought this camera here, and it cost me about 60 bucks. It had a great camera, great lens, nice lantern viewfinder, everything about it that seemed pretty good until I got home and I started paying a little closer attention once again to the bellows. On bellows, on the edges here in particular, if they ever seem kind of rough, that's a pretty good sign that you're gonna have some pinholes. Now, I did manage to patch these bellows and they're now absolutely serviceable. But as a professional photographer, am I going to take patched bellows somewhere around the world? I'm going to England actually on Thursday. Am I going to go to England with a patched set of bellows? No. I'm going to take a set that I know are perfect, because the last thing that I want is to have a problem. And then I was in another camera store in Vermont here in Pittsburgh, and I found an exact copy of this camera for $39 that had beautiful bellows, absolutely pristine. It had a newer version of the Lantern viewfinder. This particular version is like a ground glass. This particular one has an optical element on top that's much brighter and easier to see. Yet the back of the camera wasn't in that great a shape. So once again, camera cannibalism. I took the back from this camera and the lens from this camera, unmounted all of that, mounted it on this camera, and created a new camera. That's the wonderful part. Because they made so many of these cameras, as long as you're buying them within the same series, you can absolutely hack one camera onto another camera and get what literally looks like a brand new camera that's nearly 100 years old. Now, if you want to work in a 120 and a 116 camera, one thing that you're going to have to get is some 3D printed adapters. These little plugs here go on the end of a 120 film like this, and it makes it so the film can properly fit within the camera. What you can see is here on the side of the cartridge, I've added these rails to the top and bottom. All I've done is added 4 millimeters to the top and to the bottom on each side. Just a thin little piece of modeling plastic. I put a little piece of Teflon tape on top of that so the film slides through really perfect. Additionally, on a lot of these 116 cameras, I'm hoping you can see this here, the frame window on the inside there. Do you notice how I have it masked in half? The reason is the numbering system on the outside of 120 film goes a little bit too far to the edge. And if you don't mask off this window on the back, it's the number one place you're going to get a light leak on one of these cameras is through this window, because the edge of the paper literally is running down the window. So what I do is I put a little bit of gaffer's tape halfway across the window, and then I just go to like Joann Fabrics and get a little bit of that self-adhesive felt, and I just sort of felt out the window on that back half. Works perfect. I've never had a light leak once I've done that. Here's a little tip that I'll give you if you want to load 120 film in a camera like this. These are a little bit difficult to work with. Anybody who's ever used a 120 adapter like this from 116 knows that the number one problem is this. I had to knock it off. These things have a tendency of falling off, these little end tabs. A tip that I like to do, take little tiny chunks of paper like this. This is just 2 little pieces of paper that I cut down into a square. Stick it over the end, take your 116, and then push that in to the slot. What it does is it takes up that gap, and now those end caps are on there really tight. Another option is just to use a little piece of either gaffer's tape or some inexpensive black photo tape, like craft tape. I put 2 little pieces right there. Once again, just line it up and push those caps in. Now those 120 adapters, the 116 to 120 adapters, fit perfect and they don't come falling off in the camera. I always love to have the original manuals for these cameras. There's so much bad information out there. On these cameras, the way they mark the shutter of the f-stop on most of these cameras is 1, 2, 3, 4. The hell's 1, 2, 3, 4? Well, you could measure the opening based upon the focal length, but if you could find the actual manual, what you realize is that it's 8, 16, 32, 64. I've seen people give all sorts of other numbers, so it's always best. And these manuals, usually you can get a PDF version online for free, so always try to find the original manual if possible. So when I found these 2 particular cameras this last weekend, I opened them up, and to be pleasantly surprised that there was 2 rolls of film, a very old roll, a very chrome pan in there, so I'm going to be processing this later. And when I got this first 616 camera, there was also a roll of exposed 616 film. So stay tuned for a detailed video where we see, hopefully I've got something really awesome on these 2 rolls of film. We'll check it out in the coming weeks. But the biggest thing is camera cannibalism. Don't be afraid to buy multiple cameras in order to make 1 or 2 perfect versions. It's the easiest way. I use this same technique with a lot of my folding cameras. With my Kertro Super Sport Dolly cameras, I've absolutely gone in and bought like 3 or 4 versions, and I'm swapping different lenses, different backs, and different doors. Once again, all with the quest of producing that one perfect folding camera. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.